West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte
In 1936, 1937, 1938, Joseph Stalin decided he was going to consolidate his power, consolidate his hold on the Soviet Union by executing everybody he thought was in his way. It's now known as the Great Purge or the Great Terror. And it wasn't just like Stalin eliminating other political elites he thought might be in line for his job. Stalin ordered the killing of hundreds of thousands of people. By some estimates, more than 1 million people. And thanks to the records historians started to get access to right after the collapse of the Soviet Union, in the mid to late 90s, historians were finally able to pinpoint a previously unknown site inside Russia, in northern Russia, where as many as 9,000 people had been shot in the Great Purge and buried. It's just a huge site, an unmarked site, with hundreds of burial pits, 236 different pits containing more than 9,000 bodies. They didn't find it until the summer of 1997. And once they found it, they put up these stones, these markers, to commemorate it. They turned it into a memorial for the victims of Stalin. They started to hold an annual day of remembrance there. After about 20 years, though, Russian President Vladimir Putin decided that that was enough, and he didn't want any more of that. Putin, broadly, decided that Stalin had gotten a bad rap. The Soviet Union broadly got a bad rap. Stalin in particular got a bad rap. You know, what benefit is there in all this supposed history, all these stories that make him seem like such a bad guy, that make the Soviet Union seem so flawed? Let's restore the glory. Right? Sure, millions dead, but those people aren't around to tell their stories anymore. So why should any of us tell that story, let alone hear it? And so, the historian who had first located that site in northern Russia, he was arrested. They charged him with being a pedophile. The Russian government then announced plans to bring bulldozers into that site. They were going to dig up the bodies and show that this wasn't a mass burial site of Stalin's victims. This must have been something else entirely. The victims there must all have been Russians who were killed by foreigners. Because, of course, there was no gulag, there was no Great Terror, there was no Great Purge. Stalin was a stand-up guy. Russia's history is pristine. Anybody who says otherwise is obviously a degenerate, a monster. After the historian who heroically tracked down the records and discovered that site, after he was locked up and charged randomly with pedophilia, they did the same thing to the head of the local museum, who had effectively been the on-site caretaker for the site once it was discovered. He had also been vocal in his opposition to the Russian government coming in and digging it up with bulldozers. He, too, they did the same thing to him. They arrested him and charged him with being a pedophile. In both cases, the charges were widely believed to be trumped up and completely false, but they were nevertheless loudly trumpeted on Russian state TV. And the association they were trying to make was clear. You want to expose something about Russia's very dark past? Well, obviously you're a degenerate and a monster. Not even a regular criminal, not even a regular person who's just wrong. Not even just a regular criminal, but a monster who must be destroyed. That local historian who ran the museum near the burial site, who was like the de facto caretaker for the burial site, he spoke out against bulldozing it. It was widely understood that the allegations against him were ridiculous and completely false. But they did their job. They served as a pretext for locking him up. He ended up dying in prison. Never saw freedom again. With those guys out of the way, the Russian government has taken down the memorial at the site. They've redesignated the whole burial site as a sightseeing locale. It used to be a heritage site because of the mass murder that happened there. They've redesignated it now as a national sightseeing locale. Yeah, what a nice forest. What a great spot for a picnic. What are all these big square pits? Before he became what he is now, which is basically dictator for life, in the late 90s, Vladimir Putin was head of the FSB. He was head of the FSB when Boris Yeltsin was president of Russia in the late 90s. And Yeltsin, like lots of Russian leaders, had a corruption problem. More specifically, the problem Yeltsin had in 1997 was that there was a prosecutor in Russia who was investigating corruption at the highest levels in the Kremlin, including Yeltsin and his family. And for a time, it seemed like that corruption investigation might be the undoing of Yeltsin and his family and his cronies. Vladimir Putin, as head of the FSB, took care of that problem for Boris Yeltsin. Putin arranged for a video to be broadcast on national television that showed the prosecutor, or somebody who maybe kind of looked like the prosecutor, in bed with not one but two very young females. The video was low enough quality and it was shot from sort of oblique enough angles that you couldn't necessarily tell with the naked eye who this grown man was with these girls in this bed. But Putin stepped up. In his authority as head of the FSB, Vladimir Putin assured the Russian public that he could guarantee that the man in the video was in fact that prosecutor. And so that was the end of that prosecutor. And that was the end of the corruption investigation into Boris Yeltsin and his family. And in gratitude, or at least in payback, Boris Yeltsin decided that he would name as the next prime minister of Russia and then the next president of Russia that FSB guy who helped him out, Vladimir Putin. That's how Vladimir Putin rose to power in the first place in Russia. That's how he got control of the Russian government. By generating, effectively, a false pedophilia claim against just the right guy at just the right moment. That's how he got into power. Pedophilia, of course, is the most repulsive of all human behavior. It is so repulsive, it is so evil, that it makes us see red. Right? It is almost literally unthinkable. And it, therefore, understandably, can make us stop seeing anybody who's even accused of it as our fellow human. Anybody abetting it or even abiding it, it's basically the same thing. Your brain just instantly goes to monster, right? Understandably, as it is the most repulsive of all human evil. And when confronted with it, we almost can't process it. And it is a deep, dark thing to recognize that about human nature, right? The capacity of some people for that behavior, for that level of evil, and our collective, massive human revulsion and rejection of that evil. But recognizing that, to decide that you're going to try to harness that for political gain, that you're going to make false accusations of that kind, systematically to reduce your political opponents to non-human status, that is a horrific abuse of its own. And it has become one of the hallmarks of modern authoritarianism. Not only in Russia, but especially in Russia under Vladimir Putin. It's an obvious and frequent enough political tactic in Putin's Russia that in 2016, not long after our bizarre 2016 presidential election, the New York Times ran a feature on how this particular tactic kept coming up increasingly in Putin's Russia. You see the headline there. Foes of Russia say child pornography is planted to ruin them. It's so evil. It's so like meta-level exploitative and evil and base and cynical. But of course they use it, right? Vladimir Putin has been in power 22 years now in Russia. And that particularly sick hallmark of his time in power has been a constant. He has used it against all different kinds of political opponents, and it always works. During the Trump years here, we started to get the conspiracy theory cult version of it on the political right here in America. The QAnon pro-Trump online cult built its whole bizarre central conspiracy theory around these same kinds of false and fantastical claims that everybody in the world who isn't Trump is allied in some big satanic pedophilia ring. And someday Trump will catch them all and bring on mass public executions of all the Democrats and all the celebrities. And then finally we'll be free from the satanic pedophile conspiracy that runs the world. That's the basic idea of the bizarre pro-Trump QAnon conspiracy theory cult. And on the one hand, it is freakish, right? It is truly bizarre. It is a conspiracy theory cult, and you have to be like an extremism anthropologist to understand any of it. On the other hand, it's been remarkably persistent during the Trump era in American conservative politics. And it does have this clear political point, which is why authoritarian movements and dictators do some version of this all over the world. It's what some political scientists call eliminationist rhetoric. It's one thing for you to be competing in a democracy against your political opponents, right? Against fellow human beings who have different ideas about governing, and may the best candidate win. It's another thing if everybody on the other side of you in politics is inhuman, is a monster, a beast, who you have to protect children from, right? And who must be eliminated if we are ever to have any sort of civilization. Right? You don't compete against a monster in an election. You destroy them, right? You call for their public execution. And when it comes to power, the idea that you'd let one of these monsters have power because of something as small and pointless and beside the point as them winning an election, well, that's unthinkable. The election is much less important than keeping the monsters at bay. Eliminationist rhetoric. Playing with these kinds of false accusations, this kind of false accusation in particular, it is lurid and disgusting and shocking and bizarre, but it is also playing with the worst kind of fire in terms of what we are capable of in our understandable human nature. Because, you know, for people who believe these kinds of false allegations, even for people who don't necessarily believe them explicitly, but they ambiently absorb that these are the kinds of accusations that are circulating out there about people in politics, I mean, that can be used to justify almost any level of extreme response, any level of violence even in response. That's why it's a dictator's tactic. That is why it is a fascist authoritarian tactic.
It is Tuesday, the 19th of April of 2022, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays, a small, scant dash, a mere pinch of hot smoked Hungarian paprika will make all the difference in the world. Well, speaking of differences, I'm not getting into a flying COVID tube because I just don't want to get COVID. And you're trapped, especially with a bunch of people who didn't care to begin with and care even less now. And you know what I'm talking about, yes. Got a couple of things to speak about that both pretty much butt up against each other here, almost as if they're part of a whole. Now, this 33-year-old judge, Federalist Society member, by the way, that's how you get in when you're unqualified by the ABA, have never tried a trial, have never researched for a trial, and fast-tracked from the time that she got out of law school to when she became a federal judge. 33. So this young woman decided on her own. Now, just don't call her an activist judge, though. Okay, don't do that. She was supposed to hear oral arguments next week. And she decided on her own that she knew better about the science of masks than the scientists and doctors who have been saying we need to wear masks. She doesn't understand physics. She doesn't understand hydraulics. She does not even understand how air filters through the air. And through your mask. And out, too. Nope. But this is what we got. And apparently the employees of these flying COVID tubes were only too happy as soon as they heard the news. Now, I can't believe that management of these airlines called all of the flights in flight and said, okay, we can take our masks off now. No. The employees heard about it and they said, good, I don't want to wear it. Except there is a split in the airline unions over masks and anti-masks. Pretty much how it is in the larger society. So in other words, the bullies are getting their way again. I know. We are free to continue wearing a mask. But, I've been free to wear a mask all along, and these other people have been free to not wear a mask, and they never have. And that's why in my county in Southern Oregon, we continue to have infections going through the roof. And this is after people are taking home tests and are not reporting to the county. And we continue to have people die. And in the midst of it, we have people continuing to claim it's all a hoax. Now let's remember what started all this. Covering Donald Trump's ass. He rolled out and responded to the pandemic in the most irresponsible way because he's an idiot. And he surrounds himself with idiots because it makes him seem like, the head idiot. And all this is, and all these deaths, 1 million, have been to cover Donald Trump's ass. And I'm pretty damn angry about it. Because we can't raise our voices because we're woke. We can't bring up the facts because, the facts are a hoax. It's just your opinion. Which brings me to DeSantis. Why is he going after math books for having supposed CRT embedded in them? Well, I started thinking about it. And a statistics class studies a population at large to figure out the trends as the numbers fall where they may. In other words, the facts, ma'am, and nothing but the facts. Do you remember Rebecca Jones, the Florida health official who said that the rates of infection, the published rates of infection were being manipulated down and not all the numbers were being counted? And she showed to her fellow scientists how that was working. And DeSantis went after her and sicked his law enforcement officials to raid her home. And then accused her of being a computer hacker. I don't know. If they thought about it, they probably could have called her a pedophile. But it was a little early in the game, wasn't it? He went after Rebecca Jones because she laid out the facts, and the numbers don't lie unless you manipulate them to lie. And why was that? because DeSantis wanted to be more Trump than Trump. If there was a vaccine mandate, or if there was a possibility of a vaccine mandate, we're going to nip that in the bud right now. I guess they wanted to kill people. So the idea of getting rid of these math books is because the more the people understand the math, the more they will know that DeSantis and his fascist goons have been lying. And if you can keep the numbers down of those who understand math, you can just call them a Looney Tune left pedophile. Don't listen to them. They're loony left pedophiles pushing Marxism. What? So, get rid of math books. Yeah. I've been mentioning or made the comment, the statement, that it really seems like DeSantis and his crew are proving the premise of CRT. That racism is so imbued in our society, government officials will use CRT as an excuse to get rid of stuff. All right. Next thing DeSantis is going to be complaining about is that seasoned chicken is woke, Marxist, and baked by pedophiles. Because he doesn't like seasoned chicken. Look at him. We know what it's about. It's to take us back to the 50s. And I'm not talking the 1950s. I'm talking about the 1850s. So it's about time we start calling these fascists what they are. And they are fascists. I like Nazi because it rolls off the tongue. The tongue. It just has that sort of, it feels good. Nazi. But fascist will work just as well. And probably more accurate. Are we going to let them get away with it? They are backed by deep-pocketed dark money. How do you stop a fascist group of deep-pocketed money types from influencing our society and election? You expose their fascist asses. Now, Anonymous has been hacking Vlad and the military there. It would be nice if they could expose these dark money groups, like the Panama Papers exposed folk. If they are so afraid of repercussions, you know why they are afraid of repercussions, because fascists work in the dark. All right. So we get back to this 33-year-old judge who has no experience in life even. Oh, but she is married to the guy that Trump appointed, another young incompetent. But he had the right-wing credentials. And apparently, if I remember correctly, I don't have the article right in front of me, but apparently he was responsible for, was it judges? I believe it was. It might have been lawyers. 27,000. Is that true? Is that correct? I remember some large number that this guy was absolutely unqualified to run a department or a part of the department. Oh, I forgot to mention he was a Federalist Society, or he is a Federalist Society member as well. So is it any wonder they want to call Black Lives Matter, Marxist? They want to call Antifa a bunch of commies. Of course, anti-fascists would be called commies by fascists. And the way that DeSantis and all of the rest, the Jim Jordans, the Ted Cruzes, the Hollies, the Rubios, etc., just put it in our face and rub it in. Don't take off your mask. Wear your masks in public. Keep washing your hands. Stay at least 6 feet away from people and try to be in a well-ventilated area if you have to be inside. This 33-year-old judge said, oh, well, the masks aren't sanitized so they don't stop these droplets. What? It's not enough that her ruling wasn't relegated to the parties who brought the complaint. Unilaterally, without hearing oral arguments, made up her mind that she knew better about the science and public health policy than the professionals who've been there for decades, because after all, we're the reason that there's a problem now, isn't there? All right. And here we were told when Obama was elected, oh, we don't have to worry about racism anymore. Our country has changed. And all the racists are there's going to be an attrition of racists because all the young kids aren't racist anymore. Really? All right. Am I calling this 33-year-old judge a racist? I don't know. She's a Trumper. She's a Federalist Society member. They have some pretty strong opinions about the course of society and who are the, shall we say, dark elements bringing it down. What's on the menu today that we have curated for you in this fabulous salon we call West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy? Well, at the top, yes. Rachel broke it down that the fascist tool of eliminationist rhetoric has gained an alarming foothold in Trump-era politics. Rachel had Jane Mayer on last night, and Mayer had said that she had never heard the term eliminationist rhetoric. Now, of course, I suppose a lot of us have been involved with Daily Kos at one point or another, but if we haven't, it's a good reminder that Dave Newart wrote a book on eliminationism called The Eliminationists. It's how right-wing talk radio and the right wing fell into an eliminationist rhetoric, using eliminationism, getting rid of your opponents, just getting rid of them, eliminating them. Not rhetorically, but using the rhetoric to get rid of them. Stuff them in a duffel bag. So this concept of eliminationist rhetoric, I've been aware of since 2009 when Dave Newart released the book. So just saying. On the rest of the menu, Michigan's longest-serving congressman said death threats by extreme far-right members of his party are a detriment to getting good people to run. Well, you would think. And it's gotten so bad, he's retiring. The Biden administration is requiring that all steel used in infrastructure projects be made in the U.S. I can hear Cotton and Holly complaining right now how woke that is and how Marxist Biden is becoming. And a judge ruled Amazon must reinstate a former warehouse employee who was fired in the early days of the pandemic for leading a protest calling for the company to do more to protect employees against COVID-19. Oh, wow. That's rather wordy. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where the European Union's fraud agency accused French far-right presidential candidate Marine Le Pen of embezzlement just days before her runoff election against Macron. Now, some people say that they just brought it up out of thin air from a charge from 18 years ago. Actually, she's had many charges since the first one 18 years ago. It's just that the one from 18 years ago is still open. And she's got a half a dozen more in the interim. And the leader of the Anglican Church criticized the British government's plan to put some asylum seekers on one-way flights to Rwanda as going against God. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the left of the chat room link there across the page near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com is the link to our Patreon page, and please do become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio. If you could afford to send us what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink once a month, that really helps us pay our bills and all the other attendant monetary issues in running this powerhouse of resistance, as we have been doing for the last 11 years. 24/7, 365, by the way. So thank you for your generosity, and we'll give you a little pre-thanks for those of you who might be so generous in the future. Thank you. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, you can do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that, and we thank Tom for doing so. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Kos about 10 minutes before showtime. Get that posted on Twitter and those other social media platforms. Of course, as you know, the show notes and links is where you can find the actual reportage and the full articles, because sometimes we abbreviate, or we add on, or we do both. Follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West, and please pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, wherever podcasts can be found. And, of course, the deep archive of the Netroots Radio Library can be found at the Internet Archive at archive.org. All right. This first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is out of the American Independent by Kaishi Shabra. Representative Fred Upton, a repug from Michigan, told NBC's Meet the Press on Sunday that he received death threats for voting in favor of the bipartisan infrastructure bill, and that the increasing threats from extremists within his own party led him to seek retirement after serving in Congress for nearly 36 years. I call it a slow-moving night of the long knives, but that's just me. I'm a romantic. It puts you at risk, particularly when they threaten not only you. I like to think I'm pretty fast, but when they threaten your spouse or your kids or whatever, Upton told Chuck Todd, that's what really makes it frightening. Upton said the steadily growing fringe elements in the Republican Party have made it harder to convince good people to run for Congress. Well, good people running for Congress are not running for Republicans. Please. It's going to be a detriment getting good people to run, Upton said. It really will be, because I've got a school board member who lives on my street. I think he got death threats too just over the mask mandate. Welcome to the club, Fred. Upton, the longest-serving congressman in Michigan, said he believes Republicans will flip the Democrat-controlled House in this fall's midterm elections. It's Democratic-controlled. But added that the GOP will be in troubled waters if they win by a narrow majority. If that is the case, Upton said, right-wing extremists within his own party, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, will make it difficult for Republicans to govern. Oh, yeah, sure. Upton, who was one of 10 Republicans who voted to impeach former President Donald Trump for inciting the January 26, 2021 insurrection at the U.S. Capitol, is the fourth House Republican to announce his retirement after supporting Trump's impeachment. The remaining 6 House Republicans all face challenging primary contests against Trump-endorsed candidates. Although Greene lost her committee assignments due to her calls for violence against fellow lawmakers, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy has already promised she will get them all back if the GOP regains control in November. Oliver Willis of the American Independent brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. The Biden administration announced yesterday, Monday, that construction projects funded under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act will be required to use American-made steel and iron. A memo issued by the Office of Management and Budget Director, Shalonda D. Young, for heads of executive departments and agencies says that none of the funds made available for a federal financial assistance program for infrastructure, including each deficient program, may be obligated for a project unless all of the iron, steel, manufactured products, and construction materials used in the project are produced in the United States. This means all manufacturing processes, from the initial melting stage through the application of coatings, occurred in the United States, the memo summed up. The infrastructure bill was signed into law by Joe on November 15th of 21 after passing in Congress, with all Democrats voting in favor of it and a majority of Republicans opposing its passage. Infrastructure construction projects include bridge repairs across the country, as well as road construction and repair, and the installation of broadband infrastructure. Hallelujah Hedero of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A judge has ruled that Amazon must reinstate a former warehouse employee who was fired in the early days of the pandemic, saying the company unlawfully terminated the worker who led a protest calling for Amazon to do more to protect employees against COVID-19. The dispute involving Gerald Bryson, who worked at an Amazon warehouse in the New York City borough of Staten Island, has stretched on since June of 2020, when Bryson filed an unfair labor practice complaint with the National Labor Relations Board, claiming Amazon retaliated against him. Later that year, the NLRB said it found merit in Bryson's complaint that Amazon illegally fired him for workplace organizing. Amazon did not accept the findings, and the federal board filed a formal complaint against the company, triggering a lengthy administrative court process. On Monday yesterday, administrative law judge Benjamin Green said Amazon must offer Bryson his job back, as well as lost wages and benefits resulting from his discriminatory discharge. Amazon spokesperson Kelly Nantel said in a statement that the company will appeal the ruling. Of course they will. All right, that brings us to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
Hi, and welcome to COVID Quickly, a Scientific American podcast series. This is your Fast Track update on the COVID pandemic. We bring you up to speed on the science behind the most urgent questions about the virus and the disease. We demystify the research and help you understand what it really means.
I'm Tanya Lewis.
I'm Josh Fishman.
And we're Scientific American's senior health editors. Today, we'll talk about how vaccines boost immunity even if you've already been infected.
And how to handle going back to the office, even though COVID is still around.
Many unvaccinated people believe that if you got COVID once, you're totally protected against getting it again. But that's not true. Can you explain?
You're talking about the idea of natural immunity, that an early infection prevents another one. It turns out that isn't the best protection you can get. What seems to be better is something that scientists are calling hybrid immunity. That's natural infection plus a full course of vaccines. 3 recent studies support this idea. Now, a previous infection does help. A paper just published in the journal Lancet Infectious Diseases looked at people in Sweden who were infected once. They had a lower risk of another infection when compared with folks who hadn't ever been infected or folks who hadn't been vaccinated. But here's where it gets interesting. Add vaccination on top of that early infection, and it improved protection by 50%. It also kept that protection going strong for another 6 months. And that dovetails with a long-term study in England, which tracked people for more than a year. It appeared in the New England Journal of Medicine. Early infection did prevent 80% of second infections that would otherwise be expected. That's pretty good. But adding vaccines improved that protection more, to nearly 100%. Finally, a study in Brazil found that people who'd been infected and then got 2 doses of vaccines avoided 65% of the new infections that you'd normally expect, and 80% of severe COVID cases. So infection alone does something, but adding vaccines does a lot more. And all of this brings up the issue of Omicron. I wonder, Tanya, if an infection with the original Omicron, BA1, prevents you from getting BA2, the subvariant that's circulating now.
That's a great question, Josh. In a recent story, SciAm contributor Charlie Schmidt reports that early studies suggest reinfection with BA2 after BA1 is possible, but rare. If you were infected with BA1, then you're probably well protected against BA2, Stephen Griffin, a virologist at the University of Leeds School of Medicine in England, told Charlie. But that protection may not be complete, Griffin said. Countries that had big BA1 peaks, like South Africa, haven't seen a big BA2 peak so far. Then again, the UK had a big BA1 surge and still saw a notable peak in BA2 infections several months later. But that could be more to do with the fact that it dropped all COVID restrictions, so people who had avoided getting infected in the previous wave might have gotten sick later. We're already seeing an uptick in infections in parts of the US, especially in the Northeast. Whether that will lead to another surge or just a small bump remains to be seen. The good news is, many people will have some immunity from infection, vaccination, or both.
So our company just announced that it's reopening the office and everyone is expected to show up. And with COVID around, I'm not super comfortable with crowds, Tanya. Are you?
Not exactly. I've been pretty careful throughout the pandemic, avoiding most indoor places except for essential ones like the grocery store. And I always wear an N95 or KN95 mask whenever I am indoors. So the idea of going back to the office regularly, especially without a mask mandate, has me a little nervous.
Aren't you vaccinated and boosted, though?
Yes, I've had all the shots, and I'm not super concerned about getting very sick myself. But I do worry about spreading the virus to others who are more vulnerable. I actually have an immunocompromised family member who I visit from time to time. And there's also the risk of long COVID. So I'm probably going to go into the office a couple days a week, but I'll wear my best N95. What about you?
Yeah, I'm definitely with you on the masks. People who work retail in grocery stores and restaurants wear them because they deal with a stream of different people all day. So I'll do that too. And I guess I also want to keep an eye on community spread. The CDC has a tracker for this called COVID-19 community levels. You can go ahead and Google that. It looks at both new cases and hospitalizations by county, and it uses those to describe areas as low, medium, or high spread.
So how do you think we should use that info?
Well, if my area goes into medium or high, I'm going to use a mask even more often. But, it's just weird, Tanya, to look at these stats showing that cases are starting to rise and then say, hey, I'm going to hop on a crowded train or go to a crowded office, isn't it?
Yeah, it's definitely unnerving. Even though my risk of getting severely ill with COVID is fairly low, that doesn't mean I want to get it if I can help it, especially if we are really entering another surge. But does the CDC tracker miss some important information, Josh?
Yeah, it does. The tracker's pretty wishy-washy about when to wear a mask in medium risk areas.
Right. And according to the CDC, Manhattan is already considered medium risk. For now, I'll probably keep using my toolbox of precautions. In addition to wearing a good mask, I'll keep my distance on the train whenever I can, and I'll avoid crowded areas of the office.
Well, speaking of the office, what do you think of our place? Does it have a good airflow?
Well, our office doesn't have windows you can open, but it is a modern building and it does have a decent MERV filtration system. But even with these precautions, there's still some risk, and you can't help but feel a little anxious, right?
Look, anxiety's okay. I mean, this virus has killed 1 million Americans in 2 years. Now we seem to be in a world filled with spikes and dips. We do know a lot more about how to keep ourselves safer today. I think if we all act on that knowledge, like doing some of the things that you're doing, Tanya, maybe I, and a lot of other people, might start to feel kind of comfortable.
Now you're up to speed. Thanks for joining us. Our show is edited by Jeff Del Vicio and Tulika Bose.
Come back in 2 weeks for the next episode of COVID Quickly. And check out siam.com for updated and in-depth COVID news.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. And it doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage. Because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
Welcome to 60 Second Civics, the daily podcast of the Center for Civic Education. I'm Mark Gage. At the outset of the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln suspended the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus. A writ of habeas corpus is a court order directing that a prisoner be brought to court before a judge to determine whether that prisoner's detention is lawful. President Lincoln also approved military trials for civilians accused of aiding or abetting the Confederacy in certain areas of the country. More than 12,000 civilians were arrested and held by the military during the Civil War. Chief Justice Roger B. Taney's opinion in Ex parte Merryman, 1861, rebuked the president for unconstitutionally suspending the writ of habeas corpus. Lincoln's decision enabled military commanders to indefinitely imprison persons suspected of disloyalty to the Union without producing evidence in a court of law to justify their detention. Article 1, Section 9 of the U.S. Constitution says, "The privilege of the writ of habeas corpus shall not be suspended unless, when in cases of rebellion or invasion, the public safety may require it." Taney held that the president did not have authority to suspend the writ of habeas corpus without the consent of Congress. The habeas corpus clause, said Taney, appeared within Article 1 of the Constitution, pertaining to the powers and duties of Congress. However, Congress later enacted a law ratifying the president's decisions to suspend the writ of habeas corpus. That's all for today's podcast, 60 Second Civics, where civic education only takes a minute.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1995. This marks the day one of the most horrendous acts of domestic terrorism in U.S. history occurred in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. A truck bomb exploded at the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building, killing 168 people. 99 of those killed worked for the federal government. 8 were federal law enforcement agents. Those who lost their lives worked for governmental agencies including the Secret Service, U.S. Customs, the Department of Agriculture, Drug Enforcement Administration, Department of Transportation, Army and Marine Corps Recruiting, U.S. Customs, the Social Security Administration, Housing and Urban Development, and the Federal Employee Credit Union. On that horrific day, 19 children were killed, including 15 who were at a daycare center in the building. The blast left 680 people injured and maimed. More than 300 neighboring buildings were damaged or destroyed, totaling more than $600 million in damages. In the rescue effort, more than 12,000 people participated to aid those injured in the blast and to help recover those who had died. One of the men responsible for the bombing was executed for his crime. The other received a life sentence in prison. Today, a national monument and museum honors those who died. More than 4.4 million visitors have paid their respects at the memorial. One of the prominent features of the memorial is the survivor tree. A more than 100-year-old American elm stood in the parking lot across from the building. It survived the blast, and although it lost most of its branches, the tree thrives to this day. An inscription on a wall around the tree reads, "The spirit of this city and this nation will not be defeated. Our deeply rooted faith sustains us."
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River and the Rogue River Valley of southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 42 degrees Fahrenheit. Expecting a high in the low 50s, rain diminishing to a few showers this afternoon, though it will be bringing over almost a third of an inch of rain, and thunder possible, and winds will be out of the southwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Cloudy this evening, then becoming cloudy after midnight. Lows in the upper 30s, winds out of the southeast at 5 to 10 miles per hour. And then half an inch of rain coming tomorrow with thunder possible. Highs in the low 50s. Winds out of the south at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Confirmed cases of coronavirus in Jackson County have not been updated yet and should be later on today. I will mention that as of late Friday, we stand at 427,055 confirmed cases and deceased at 524. Grass pollen is rated as moderate here in Rogue River proper. The air quality index for the region is good at 27 parts per million. And that daytime UV index has ticked up from moderate to high to level 6. Barometric pressure is rising at 29.92 inches. Visibility is down to 1/4 mile because we are under foggy conditions currently, and I failed to mention that. And relative humidity is at 98%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that are crowdsources from around the world. London is 61 and partly cloudy. Paris is 65 and fair. Rome is 67 and sunny. Kyiv is 45 degrees and cloudy. Kabul is 60 and partly cloudy. Hong Kong is 67 and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 56 degrees and mostly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 65 and clear. San Francisco, California is 52 degrees and cloudy. And New York is 45 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that are crowdsources from around the world. Angela Charlton of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Paris prosecutors are studying a report by the European Union's fraud agency accusing far-right French presidential candidate Marine Le Pen and other members of her nationalist party of misusing public funds while serving in the European Parliament. The report was disclosed by French investigative news site Mediapart just days before Le Pen faces incumbent Emmanuel Macron in a runoff election on Sunday that could determine Europe's future direction. Le Pen's party, National Rally, seeks to diminish the EU's powers, get rid of NATO, and join Vlad. And I'm not kidding. Le Pen denied wrongdoing, dismissing the report as foul play by the European Union a few days before the second round of the election. Speaking on a campaign trip in Normandy yesterday, Monday, she said, "I'm well accustomed to this, and I think the French will absolutely not fall for it, except tens of thousands of people are in the streets protesting her." A similar EU fraud investigation was disclosed ahead of the 2017 French presidential election, which Le Pen lost to Macron. Le Pen was handed preliminary charges by French investigators over that case, which is still ongoing.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Jill Lawless of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The leader of the Anglican Church strongly criticized the British government's plan to put some asylum seekers on one-way flights to Rwanda, saying subcontracting out our responsibilities to refugees cannot stand up to God's scrutiny. Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, made the unusually direct political intervention in his Easter Sunday sermon, saying there are serious ethical questions about sending asylum seekers overseas. He said, subcontracting out our responsibilities, even to a country that seeks to do well, like Rwanda, is the opposite of the nature of God, who himself took responsibility for our failures. Speaking at Canterbury Cathedral in southeast England, Welby said that while the details are for politics and politicians, the principle must stand the judgment of God, and it cannot. Well, well, well. That brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up tomorrow for, how coincidental, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théères, des photos de bord de mer, mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs sous la pluie de novembre. Tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs sous la pluie de novembre. Tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver, dans mon jardin d'hiver.